Yes, it can hurt, Harry. Great way to save someone's life, Dobby. Good job. So, yeah. Yes! Amazing. Amazing. Hello fellow readers, book lovers, and whoever else is watching this. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. I'm here repping another piece of Ravenclaw merch. I'm not sure if you can see it. I got it from Etsy. It says, wit beyond measure, but you can't see it behind my microphone. It's this really comfortable sweater, and it's gonna make me sweat to death in this video, but I love it, so we're committing to the bit. Welcome back to my Harry Potter series. Today's episode is my reaction to Book 2, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Before we get started, I do have a couple of thoughts though. One might even call them a disclaimer. I got a couple of comments on my last video saying that I was reaching to find inconsistencies, and I just want to clear the air on what I'm actually even doing here. I'm not here to judge the books to see if they reach a certain standard or something. What I'm doing with this series is reading a book series that everyone in my generation read, but that I missed. If you want to know why, you can watch my first video. But then I'm sharing my thoughts and reactions with you. I am a fantasy editor by trade, and so oftentimes my thoughts will be colored by that experience, as most people's reactions are colored by their experience. But I'm not grading this series or editing it at all. So no, I'm not hunting through the books for flaws and inconsistencies and poking holes in the plot. It's no skin off my back if there's no issues with the book. Then hey, I just found another series that I like. And you might disagree with some of the takes that I have, but that's the beauty of reading, is that we can all have our own experiences. You might disagree with things that I find problems with and get stuck on, and vice versa. But that's what we're here for. We're here to read and share this experience together. So come along as I share with you my thoughts and reactions to reading Harry Potter Book 2, The Chamber of Secrets, and feel free to share your reactions and thoughts and your thoughts on my takes in the comments below. We open the book on a hilariously bleak reminder of Harry's life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon and the family are preparing for a very important dinner with a prospective business partner of Mr. Dursley's, and he's prepping them on all of their roles. And while Dudley recites a few of his roles, such as opening the door, taking coats, Harry recites his roles as, I'll be in my room making no noise, pretending I'm not there. It's so harsh to do that to a child. And to make them repeat it, not even once either. As they continue to plan, Vernon makes him repeat it like 3 different times. That's the interesting thing about the Dursleys, is that they are written to be so obviously cruel, but so comically cruel at the same time. To further the sad state of affairs, it's Harry's birthday, and not only is there no notice or celebration of any kind, but we also get a depiction of Harry sadly singing happy birthday to himself. He also doesn't get any mail from Ron, Hagrid, Hermione, any of them. In fact, they haven't written to him at all summer. But don't worry, this section of the book is not only dark and gloomy. Snarky Harry is back and cracking me up as usual. For example, Dudley goes to tease Harry that no one cares that it's his birthday, and it goes like this. I know what day it is, Dudley repeated, coming right up to him. Well done, said Harry. So you finally learned the days of the week. Oh, and then Harry has started to fend off Dudley's bullying by pretending to do magic against him, and it's hilarious. Why are you staring at the hedge? He said suspiciously. I'm trying to decide what would be the best spell to set it on fire, said Harry. Dudley stumbled backward at once, a look of panic on his fat face. You can't. Dad told you you're not allowed to do magic. He said he'll chuck you out of the house, and you haven't got anywhere else to go. You haven't got any friends to take you. Jiggery pokery, said Harry in a fierce voice. Hocus pocus. Squiggly wiggly. Mom! howled Dudley, tripping over his feet as he dashed backward towards the house. Mom, he's doing you know what? I love everything about Harry messing with Dudley while saying stupid stuff. Like, Harry knows spells. He could have used some convincing sounding Latin words, and so it's so much funnier when he scares Dudley absolutely witless, saying silly gibberish like this. But enough of this. I teased the dinner party, and you all know what that means. The second Harry entered his bedroom and saw a house elf on his bed, I squealed with joy. I've never been more excited for an awkward encounter in a book. I've been waiting for Dobby to appear forever, and I didn't realize it would happen in just the second book. Harry was told, as we said, to be quiet and not disturb the dinner party, and Dobby is immediately so loud. The whole scene is both stressful and adorable, and I can't help but feel bad for Harry. The entire wizarding world seems to be conspiring to screw with Harry's ability to stay on the Dursleys' less bad side. We all know he'll never be on their good side. So Dobby first absolutely fawns over Harry. Apparently having a baby defeat the Dark Lord was a huge moment for smaller magical creatures with less autonomy, such as house elves who are slaves. That scene with Dobby fawning over Harry is so embarrassing embarrassing to watch. And I also just feel really bad for Dobby, that he feels like he needs to fawn over just like this random boy.
He is literally just a guy!
Plus, he keeps telling Harry not to go back to Hogwarts, and every time he does, he feels like he has to hurt himself as punishment, and just, so bad. Dobby just keeps telling Harry that he can't go back to Hogwarts, and Harry is like, absolutely no way, there's no way I'm staying with the Vernons. I'm going to Hogwarts, that's my happy place. But Dobby's like, why would Hogwarts be your happy place? You don't even have any friends. They haven't written to you at all. And Harry's like, how did you know that? And it's revealed that Dobby has in fact been stopping their letters, and that's why they haven't written to him. So now Harry is even more resolved to go back to Hogwarts, because obviously, why would you trust the person who's been stopping all of your friends from talking to you? And seeing this resolve, Dobby takes matters into his own hands and rushes downstairs. Harry follows him, trying to make sure that he doesn't disrupt the dinner. But Dobby gets to the kitchen first, and Harry has no choice but to watch in horror as Dobby casts a spell that lifts the pudding that Aunt Petunia made for dinner and crashes it to the ground. The Dursleys rush in, and Dobby disappears, leaving a scene that looks obviously like Harry has smashed the pudding. Worse, just then, an owl crashes through the window, and their dinner guest happens to be absolutely frightened of owls, and she and her husband rush away, and dinner is absolutely ruined. But let's talk about that owl. It brought a letter, and what might that letter have been? It's from the Improper Use of Magic office, which I didn't know that there was such an office. I swear, despite having watched the movies and being fairly deep in Harry Potter lore without having read the books, I've never heard of that office once. Apparently they monitor Hogwarts kids and make sure that they're not casting spells away from school. And let me just say, that makes everything make so much more sense. I really wondered why even bother having a rule like don't do magic away from school, since there would be no way to enforce that, but apparently there is. Also, it makes way more sense that the no doing magic outside of school rule was a Ministry of Magic rule and not a Hogwarts rule like I had previously assumed. Like, in what world would teachers not want their students to be practicing things on their own time? Of course it's going to be more of like an administrative rule and not a school-bound rule. Like, magic is pretty dangerous, and I also would not trust the secret of magic existing in the hands of 11-year-olds who are allowed to do magic. So yeah, this one letter just made one more thing about the Potterverse just slide into place, and everything made so much more sense. Now, this letter was less of a good thing for Harry than it was for me, because it just told the Dursleys that he's not allowed to do magic away from school. And so, of course, Harry immediately gets locked in his room. Not just locked in his room, bars placed on the window, and a little slot cut underneath the door so that they can slide food in and never open the door. This situation got dark fast. I know that they were technically punishing him for ruining the big dinner, not just finding out that he can't do magic and locking him away, but this level of escalation is terrifying. Seriously, this degree of child abuse, kids who find themselves in this sort of situation don't usually survive. I was shocked and horrified. Luckily, very soon after this, Fred, George, and Ron Weasley show up in a flying car, of all things, to break him out. They pulled off the bars, and Fred and George apparently know how to pick a lock, and so they got him out of the room, got his trunk, got his owl, got everything in the car, and started to fly away. But not before the Dursley house is woken up, and they try to prevent Harry from getting away, but luckily, they all get away. Ron then explains that since Harry wasn't writing back, he got worried that Harry had been locked up by the Dursleys, and turns out he was right. Harry then tells Ron, Fred, and George about the experience with Dobby, and they actually brush it all off as Dobby getting sent as a prank. And that explanation actually made a lot of sense. Realistically, that is one of the most obvious explanations, and so it makes sense that they kind of grabbed onto that, rather than having the explanation be that there is actually some big plot and that Harry should stay away. From here on, Harry gets to stay with the Weasleys for the remaining weeks before school starts, so let's talk about them. First off, Mr. Weasley works for the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, and cleans up messes when Muggle stuff gets enchanted, and also spends all of his free time taking apart Muggle stuff, enchanting it, and putting it back together. It's just so great. Like, he made a flying car. He later justifies this by saying that there's a loophole in the law that doesn't say anything about enchanting something without ever intending to use it. And Mrs. Weasley rightfully calls him out on having written that law and potentially written that loophole into the law. One of the twins says this great line, "If Dad raided our house, he'd have to arrest himself. Drives Mom mad." We get this excellent introduction to Mrs. Weasley as well. She's coming towards them while they're getting out of the car after saving Harry, and we just hear these snippets of her ranting. Bed's empty, no note, car gone, could have crashed, out of my mind with worry. Did you care? Never, as long as I lived. Wait till your father gets home. We never had trouble like this from Bill or Charlie or Percy. She's so mad she doesn't even finish any of her thoughts, and I just really love the way that the writing conveys her emotions in this moment. During these next couple of weeks, we get quite a few snippets of life at the Weasleys, including a denoming of the garden. Fred, George, and Ron take Harry out to the gardens to teach him how to denome it, which includes grabbing the very lumpy, potato-looking gnomes and throwing them over the fence. They'll be back, Ron said, as they watch the gnomes disappear into the hedge on the other side of the field. They love it here. Dad's too soft on them. He thinks they're funny. I just love the little potato gnomes, and that throwing them doesn't hurt them, and that Mr. Weasley thinks they're funny, so he's too soft on them, and that's why they have so many. I do wonder why only wizard gardens seem to be plagued by the real gnomes and not statue gnomes. Are they only interested in carrots grown by people with magic? Are they even eating the plants in the gardens or just hanging out? Who knows? It doesn't seem on the first reading that the world building goes that deep, but I could be wrong. Also, to be clear, I don't think it's bad to not have the world building be that deep, especially from the tone set by the first book. This doesn't feel like the kind of series that needs to have everything have a super detailed logical explanation in world. Also, even though they already know how to denome a garden, Mrs. Weasley has to read to them how Gilderoy Lockhart would do it in his book. I forgot about him, but this is excellent foreshadowing for the grip that his books have on the wizarding world at the moment that this book takes place. And the fact that their entire book list for this year is almost entirely Lockhart's books, that also helps set it up. Though, if we're going to talk about the fact that most of the books on their book lists are Lockhart's books, and, spoiler, he ends up teaching one of the main classes that's requiring these books, I have to say, nothing has ever felt more realistic. College professors do be selling their books to students at inflated prices because they know you have to buy them to take the class. This is the most accurate thing that anyone has ever written. Speaking of book lists, as they're talking about going to Diagon Alley to get their supplies, Mrs. Weasley is talking about how they're going to have to get a lot of Ginny's supplies secondhand, especially books, and I was just thinking, doesn't Harry have those books? Like, he literally has those books with them that he could lend to her. I mean, he doesn't have like a robe that he could give her because obviously he still needs his, but like he could easily lend or rent the books to them, or I don't know, with his massive fortune buy them books. Not saying that he needs to, he doesn't owe them that necessarily, but he does say over and over again how bad he feels for being rich when they are poor. Okay, but on from that, let's talk about Floo powder. I loved reading about the Floo powder, first because it's such an imaginative concept, and second because the mechanics in the book seem very different from how they appear in the movies, and I like how the book does it way better. For example, the powder glitters. I don't remember that from the movie. I could just be remembering wrong, but I do love some glitter. So they throw the powder into the flames and it turns the flames into some pocket dimension tunnel that is all wizard fires or something. He took a pinch of glittering powder from the flower pot, stepped into the fire, and threw the powder into the flames. With a roar, the fire turned emerald green and rose higher than Fred, who stepped right into it, shouted, "Diagon Alley," and vanished. Then Mrs. Weasley tells Harry, "You must speak clearly, dear," which I think they played with really well in the movie by having Harry say diagonally instead of Diagon Alley, but that isn't how it happens in the book. Speaking of that, I've literally spent my entire life, because I watched this movie, this one specifically, when I was young, I've spent my entire life wondering how him saying diagonally got him like one street off from Diagon Alley, when theoretically, if you just say diagonally, then it should send you out of a chimney diagonally in literally any place in the world. But in the book, it makes way more sense. Get this. "You must speak clearly, dear," Mrs. Weasley told Harry as George dipped his hand into the flower pot. "And mind you get out at the right grate." "Right what?" Harry said nervously as the fire roared and whipped George out of sight too. "Well, there are an awful lot of wizard fires to choose from, you know, but as long as you've spoken clearly. Now, when you get into the fire, say where you're going. And keep your elbows tucked in," Ron advised. "And your eyes shut," Mrs. Weasley said. "The soot, don't fidget," said Ron, "or you might well fall out of the wrong fireplace. But don't panic and get out too early. Wait until you see Fred and George." Trying hard to bear all this in mind, Harry took a pinch of Floo powder and walked to the edge of the fire. He took a deep breath, scattered the powder into the flames, and stepped forward. "To Diagon Alley," he coughed. It felt as though he was being sucked down a giant plug hole. He seemed to be spinning very fast. The roaring in his ears was deafening. He tried to keep his eyes open, but the whirl of the green flames made him feel sick. Something hard knocked into his elbow, and he tucked it in tightly, still spinning and spinning. Squinting through his glasses, he saw a blurred stream of fireplaces and snatched glimpses of the rooms beyond. He closed his eyes again, wishing it would stop, and then he fell face forward onto the cold stone and felt his glasses shatter. Dizzy and bruised, covered in soot, he got gingerly to his feet, holding his broken glasses up to his eyes. He was quite alone, but where he was, he had no idea. I just really love the concept of taking a slide down a pocket dimension and all the fireplaces rushing past, and it's hard to tell which one's yours, and if you fidget, then you fall out the wrong one. Also, you know, if he was headed down the correct path and like wiggled or something and got ejected early, that makes way more sense for him to have gotten it wrong, but not very wrong, and only be a couple streets away. In fact, it's mentioned later that he got out one click too late. Unfortunately for Harry, he ended up on the evil side of town. Thank goodness Hagrid was around the corner, because there was this lady trying to sell him something and it really seemed like he was about to get abducted. Also, Hagrid sees that he's covered in soot, and I just love that, like, while he's trying to brush him off, he's like slamming him into the wall. Hagrid is such a lovely and chaotic character. Also, Hagrid says, "Don't want no one to see you in Nocturne Alley." And I thought it was going to be foreshadowing for the fact that later on, Harry gets mistaken for the heir of Slytherin, and I thought someone was going to be like, "Ooh, I saw you down that alley," and have that be like further evidence against Harry. But it did not come back out. Back to Diagon Alley, because remember, Hagrid found Harry. He brings him from Nocturne Alley to Diagon Alley. And we meet up with Ron and Hermione and the rest of the Weasleys, and Hermione brought her parents. Amazing. I didn't know we got to meet them. I thought the only time we ever got to see them was later on in the series when she erases herself from their memories for some reason that I do not remember. Oh. And in this section, Percy is reading a book called Prefects Who Gained Power, which is just this hilarious title for a book, especially for someone who is a prefect. Okay, but beyond that, all throughout this book, Percy acts super sus, and I still don't know why. At the end of the book, Ginny tells Ron and Harry and the twins that Percy had a secret girlfriend, and that's why he was being sus and being in all these weird places at these weird times, but I still don't really know why there was such an emphasis placed on that. I wonder if it was building up to some character development moment happening in a later book, or if they were just trying to make more characters seem vaguely sus to continue to obscure who the heir of Slytherin was. But I will say I never got the vibe that Percy was being set up to be a potential sus character in the role of maybe being the heir of Slytherin. Like, that's not the vibe I got. I was just always like, why is he always around doing weird things? If you know what that was about, tell me in the comments, because I'm really confused. Oh, but I was happy to see that after a run-in with Gilderoy Lockhart at a bookstore and getting used by Lockhart for clout and ending up in a picture with him on the front page of the newspaper, Harry gets gifted a complete set of Lockhart's books, and he gives it to the Weasleys and decides to buy his own. So it was nice to see that Harry was able to give them some stuff since he was so stressed about their financial strain. Okay, but let's talk about Malfoy in this scene. "Famous Harry Potter," said Malfoy, "can't even go into a bookshop without making the front page." "Leave him alone. He didn't want all that," said Ginny. It was the first time she had spoken in front of Harry. She was glaring at Malfoy. "Potter, you've got yourself a girlfriend," drawled Malfoy. Ginny went scarlet as Ron and Hermione fought their way over. "Oh, it's you," said Ron, looking at Malfoy as if he were something unpleasant on the sole of his shoe. "Bet you're surprised to see Harry here, eh?" "Not as surprised as I am to see you in a shop, Weasley," retorted Malfoy. "I suppose your parents will go hungry for a month to pay for that lot." I love Ginny for sticking up for Harry like this. It's the first time we've seen her speak in this book, and it just makes me excited to see what sort of character she shapes up to be. But, like I said, talking about Malfoy in this scene, wow, he really pulls no punches in making fun of people. Like, going to that level of making fun of someone because they're poor? Yeesh! After they all get their books, it's basically time to go to Hogwarts, and they all start running through the wall at platform 9 3/4, and Harry and Ron go last. They run together and both slam into the wall instead of getting through to the platform. So Ron and Harry have the brilliant idea to take the flying car to Hogwarts, which apparently the Weasleys drove to the station. Not exactly sure how they fit Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, Ginny, Harry, Ron, Fred, George, Percy, and all of their trunks and gear in the little car. But probably the answer is magic.
It means it was bigger inside than outside.
But anyway, Harry and Ron decide to drive the flying car to Hogwarts. My neighbor is playing guitar through the wall. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but if you can, that's what's going on. There's a lot of description of this scene, including the fact that Harry and Ron keep dipping below the clouds just a little bit to see where the train is and follow it to Hogwarts, which I'm glad of, because otherwise I would have been like, how on earth do they know the way to Hogwarts? They are 12-year-olds. The best part about this entire situation, though, is that we get to see how the car turns invisible. I always love the different explanations of the mechanics of invisibility. For example, the flying car, when it turns invisible, it turns everything invisible. It turns them invisible, it turns the car invisible, it turns them invisible to themselves and to each other, everything in the car is invisible. We've already seen the invisibility cloak turn Harry invisible, where like he can look down at himself inside the cloak and still see himself. He can look inside and see Ron if they're both inside the cloak. But the car, on the other hand, like I said, turns everything invisible. So Harry can't even see himself. Harry describes this as feeling like he's a pair of floating eyeballs, and I just really love that mechanic and the explanation, because it means that they spend the entire drive to Hogwarts seeing absolutely nothing, not even themselves. And they're like doing different things like driving and eating snacks, and I just love that. Then when they finally get to Hogwarts, the car starts failing, probably run out of gas, and they land in the worst possible place, in the middle of the Whomping Willow. And in the chaos of trying to get out while getting attacked by the tree that they're in, Ron breaks his wand. I'd forgotten how that happened. And the car dumps all their stuff out and drives off into the Forbidden Forest, looking much like a battered dog with its tail between its legs. Harry and Ron rush inside to try to get to the opening banquet, which has already started, and in the doorway they have this conversation. "Hang on," Harry muttered to Ron. "There's an empty chair at the staff table. Where's Snape?" "Maybe he's ill," Ron said hopefully. "Maybe he's left," said Harry, "because he's missed out on the Defense Against the Dark Arts job again." "Or maybe he's been sacked," said Ron enthusiastically. "I mean, everybody hates him." "Or maybe," said a very cold voice right behind them, "he's waiting to hear why you two didn't arrive on the school train." Mortifying. Not only getting in trouble, but getting caught talking about hoping someone got fired by them? I would be deceased. Okay, I have a bunch of small thoughts from my notes in this next section. First off, they go to Professor Snape's office, which apparently is in the dungeon? What? Then we find out they might get Mr. Weasley fired because, you know, they drove the car that he enchanted. And apparently some muggles saw them before they turned on the invisibility. Then Dumbledore decides not to expel them, and Snape, quote, looked as though Christmas had been cancelled. Wow. He hates them. Also, he's probably a bad person to have such glee over their misfortune. It's one thing to not like a student, but this feels like another thing. Okay, so now they're at Hogwarts. Let's talk about it. Apparently there are only 5 second-year Gryffindor boys. I swear there were more the first year. What happened to them? Okay, they go to breakfast on the first day, and this happens. 100 or so owls streamed in, circling the hall and dropping letters and packages into the chattering crowd. A big, lumpy parcel bounced off Neville's head, and a second later, something large and gray fell into Hermione's jug, spraying them all with milk and feathers. "Earl," said Ron, pulling the bedraggled owl out by the feet. Earl slumped unconscious onto the table, his legs in the air, and a damp red envelope in his beak. "Earl, the poor, sad, sad owl!" I spit out my drink reading this, just saying. But also, maybe they need to let poor Earl retire. All I could think about was this owl. But the scene isn't over yet. "Oh no," Ron gasped. "It's all right, he's still alive," said Hermione, prodding Earl gently with the tip of her finger. "It's not that, it's that." Ron was pointing at the red envelope. It looked quite ordinary to Harry, but Ron and Neville were both looking at it as though they expected it to explode. "What's the matter?" said Harry. She sent me a howler," said Ron faintly. "You'd better open it, Ron," said Neville in a timid whisper. "It'd be worse if you don't. My gran sent me once and I ignored it," and he gulped. It was horrible. And he does open it, and this is what it says. "Stealing the car? I wouldn't have been surprised if they'd expelled you. You wait till I get a hold of you. I don't suppose you stopped to think about what your father and I went through when he saw it had gone. Letter from Dumbledore last night. I thought your father would die of shame. We didn't bring you up to behave like this. You and Harry could both have died." And my thought at this point was, isn't sending a howler mentioning the car a bad idea? Won't that get Mr. Weasley in trouble? And sure enough, absolutely disgusted. Your father's facing an inquiry at work. It's entirely your fault. And if you put another toe out of line, we'll bring you straight back home. Oof, they did get Mr. Weasley in trouble. Also, I really love this. So Hermione is pretty miffed at them for breaking the rules, but after they get the howler, she starts acting way more normal to them because she decides that they've been punished enough. It's so classic. She's just such a consistent character. And I also get a lot of why people didn't like her until they watched the movies. Also, in day 1, there's this less satisfying moment, one might even call frustrating. Lockhart pulls Harry aside and basically tells him, "I know you flew into Hogwarts on a flying car to get on the front page of the paper because you're addicted to fame after I got you on the front page of the paper after we met in Diagon Alley and had that little photo shoot." I don't know why I said that fast, but I did. It's stupid frustrating that Lockhart can't see past his own fame enough to realize that Harry Potter is actually already famous and might have been lending fame to Lockhart in that photo, not the other way around. But beyond show that Harry literally couldn't care less for fame and was just trying to get to Hogwarts. Another funny moment in this scene is that Hermione raises her hand so aggressively that she almost knocks Harry's glasses off of his face, and I love it. More on Hermione. There's a bit of a theme throughout this book that Hermione is very much caught up in the Lockhart fervor and seems to have a bit of a crush on him. We first see this when Ron notices that in Hermione's planner, she's outlined all of Lockhart's lessons in hearts. I actually really liked this theme in the book. In the first book, Hermione is very studious and really only cares about rules and learning, and I won't say she seemed one-dimensional, because she didn't, but I could easily see her becoming a caricature instead of a character. Taking the time to show another side of her, the fangirl side of her, the side that very much wants to impress the famous young teacher, showing that side of her continued to add dimension to Hermione and humanize her. After this, we get this scene with Colin, a first year who's obsessed with Harry, and he's trying to get a picture with him, and Malfoy makes it all about the Harry Potter fan club, and then somehow Lockhart shows up, and Lockhart ends up in the middle of it and turns it into a picture of him and Harry instead of Harry and Colin, so it isn't even the point of what the picture was about. But of course, Lockhart is being so generous by making the picture include him and making it so much more valuable because of that. In this whole fiasco, however, we get insight into the moving pictures that I found very interesting. Colin mentioned something about moving pictures being developed in certain conditions or special potions or something. I love getting tidbits like these, but they do bring up new questions and new curiosities in me. For example, how do paintings work? Moving paintings, like the portrait of the fat lady that is the door to the Gryffindor dormitory. Maybe the paint contains some of the same potions that are used to develop the moving picture film or something. But now I have an even bigger question, okay? So clearly these pictures at least have a certain essence of the person that they are picturing in them, right? For example, the photo that was just taken shows up later, and Lockhart is literally trying to drag Harry into the scene, and Harry just does not want to be in the frame, and they're just constantly fighting in frame. And so clearly their personalities are at play in the pictures, right? That's the exact dynamic that would be happening if it were actually Harry and Lockhart. So my question is, are the portraits alive? Are the moving pictures alive? Or are they just little enchantments that don't think at all, but just have like a script of 5 actions that they can do, kind of like a little animation? Or are they like AI versions of the person? Can they learn? Can they respond to you? Do they exist as their own beings? What exactly are these portraits, and how far does the magic go? Like, if you have a conversation with them, will they remember it later? How does it work exactly? But back to classes, and unfortunately back to Lockhart. He had a quiz in his class at the very beginning that is everything wrong with the world. Harry looked down at the paper and read, "What is Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color? What is Gilderoy Lockhart's secret ambition? What, in your opinion, is Gilderoy Lockhart's greatest achievement to date?" On and on it went, over 3 sides of paper, right down to, when is Gilderoy Lockhart's birthday, and what would his ideal gift be? It would be so embarrassing to do well on that test. Oh, and Hermione does do well. Listen to this. "Miss Hermione Granger knew my secret ambition is to rid the world of evil and market my own range of hair care potions. Good girl." Good girl? Ah! I got the major ick there. He just said good girl to a student. Ugh. Okay, then later in this scene, or maybe another one, the class where he sets loose a bunch of pixies and then bails on them and leaves Harry and Ron and Hermione to get the pixies back in the box. In this scene, Ron starts voicing doubts that Lockhart actually did what he said he did in the books, especially since he seemed incapable of getting the pixies back in the box. I appreciate this moment because it really showcases Ron's street smarts and discernment. Hermione, on the other hand, easily dismisses Ron's concerns, showing that she isn't nearly as good at judging people in this way yet, and that she's easily enamored. Her rule-following nature makes her trust authority a lot more and seek their approval regardless of who that authority is. Well, within reason. On the other hand, Ron clearly doesn't think very much before he acts. For example, like trying to do things with his broken wand, like curse Malfoy in the famous Eat Slugs scene. Okay, but interestingly, this scene didn't go like I expected it to. Ron actually tells Malfoy to eat slugs on page 108, and it seems more of an insult since he doesn't have his wand out at all. "Eat slugs, Malfoy," said Ron angrily. Crabbe stopped laughing and started rubbing his conker-like knuckles in a menacing way. But Crabbe seems to take it as fighting words, at least. Later, when Ron is even more mad at Malfoy on page 124 for calling Hermione a mudblood, this happens. "How dare you!" And Ron plunged his hand into his pockets, pulled out his wand, yelling, "You'll pay for that one, Malfoy," and pointing it furiously under Flint's arms at Malfoy's face. A loud bang echoed across the stadium, and a jet of green light shot out of the wrong end of Ron's wand, hitting him in the stomach and sending him reeling backward onto the grass. Ron, are you all right?" squealed Hermione. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he gave an almighty belch, and several slugs dribbled out of his mouth onto his lap. So I'm a little confused as to why raising his wand made him eat slugs. even though he didn't utter those words in this scene at all. Like, I think Hermione at one point validates that that actually is a curse, and so maybe the wand just remembered his intentions from before, and since it was sort of messed up and broken, it just brought those intentions out at a different moment. Also, I'm not really sure that we've seen any magic done without people saying spells, so maybe his wand is really messed up. Either way, it makes sense for the directors to put these two scenes together, but I don't really mind them being separate in the book. It's almost like teasing the concept and then later having it be brought to fruition. Also, a quick note here, Hermione and Harry both don't know what that term means, and Ron has to explain it to them, and that makes way more sense than what happens in the movie, which is Hermione explaining it to them. Ron is the one who was raised in wizarding culture and is steeped in that culture, and so him understanding the nuances of all of these various slurs and terms makes way more sense than Harry or Hermione, who have just been introduced to this world and therefore wouldn't necessarily understand the depth of various phrases and the meaning carried behind them. Okay, so that whole kerfuffle happened at Quidditch practice, but there's a lot more I want to talk about Quidditch, so let's talk about it. So the Gryffindor team reserved the pitch to practice Quidditch, and they were practicing on it, and in the middle of that, the Slytherin team show up with written permission from Snape, the head of their house, that they're allowed to actually use the pitch at that time to train their new seeker, which is Malfoy. My question is, why does Snape have authority to usurp the scheduling of the pitch? You would think that he would just, like, give them the ability to sign up for more slots since they need more practice time. Also, do teammates not get replaced every year? Why is this instance special? I just don't understand the dynamics here. That's not how reservations work.
I don't understand. I made a reservation. Do you have my reservation?
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, we ran out of cars.
But the reservation keeps the car here. That's why you have the reservation.
I know why we have reservations.
I don't think you do.
Also, if they're going to override a reservation, wouldn't you think that they would do it before the day that the reservation is? Especially before they're already currently in that time slot? Okay, you get the idea. But this whole situation is stupid. Like, I get that Malfoy would buy his way onto the Slytherin team. His dad bought the entire Slytherin team, the Nimbus 2001s, the newest broom, so that he could get onto the team. That's totally believable. But the fact that students are responsible for their own sports gear in the first place feels a bit like class warfare. If the school doesn't provide brooms for everyone, then you would think that they would at least have like a range of broom specifications, like you could only get brooms in these certain models or something. Without that rule, since all the broom models have such a range of performance, it makes the sport practically unplayable. But since they don't have that rule, I suggest a rewrite. Harry buys the entire Gryffindor team Nimbus 2001s. Okay, but for real, I could totally see a 12-year-old who loves the sport using his wealth in this specific irresponsible way. One more thought about Quidditch and then I promise I'll move on. I'm gonna say it. I think that Quidditch is ruined by the snitch. Ooh. Each regular goal, or quaffle, only gets you 10 points, but catching the snitch gets you 150 points. Based on soccer games, goals don't happen that often. I think maybe if they were to make it so that catching the snitch is what ends the game, but doesn't give you that extra 150 points or something, that would make more sense. But where you're trying to make these goals back and forth, and then catching the snitch both ends the game and gives you 150 points, it kind of makes it feel like catching the snitch is the only part of the game and makes the rest of the sport and players seem obsolete. Oh, and there should be a net underneath them. Why should Little League sports be life or death when there's already literally life or death in the books? Okay, that's my last thought. I promise I'm done. Ooh, yes. Okay, so next, Harry hears creepy whisperings in the walls talking about wanting to kill people. And then, while following the voices and trying to figure out what they are, Harry ends up accidentally sort of befriending Nearly Headless Nick. Nick helps Harry out when he gets in a bind, and then he invites Harry to his death day party, and I really like this whole plot. He specifically wants Harry to tell the rest of the Headless Hunt who are coming to his death day party that Nearly Headless Nick is in fact very scary, despite the fact that his head is still partially attached. Sorry for my chair squeaking. Harry does end up going to the death day party and brings Ron and Hermione, and they hang out with the ghosts and the rotten hors d'oeuvres. Hermione then runs into Moaning Myrtle, and they have this super awkward chat where Hermione tries to pretend that she wasn't avoiding Moaning Myrtle when she totally was. "How are you, Myrtle?" said Hermione in a falsely bright voice. "It's nice to see you out of the toilet." Myrtle sniffled. "Miss Granger was just talking about you," said Peeves slyly in Myrtle's ear. "Just saying how nice you look tonight," said Hermione, glaring at Peeves. Myrtle eyed Hermione suspiciously. "You're making fun of me," she said, silver tears welling rapidly in her small, see-through eyes. "No, honestly, didn't I just say how nice Myrtle's looking?" said Hermione, nudging Harry and Ron painfully in the ribs. Oh, yeah, she did. Don't lie to me, Myrtle gasped, tears now flooding down her face, while Peeves chuckled happily over her shoulder. Do you think I don't know what people call me behind my back? Fat Myrtle, ugly Myrtle, miserable, moaning, moping Myrtle. You've missed out, Spotty, Peeves hissed in her ear. Moaning Myrtle burst into anguished sobs and fled from the dungeon. Peeves shot after her, pelting her with moldy peanuts, yelling, Spotty, Spotty. Oh man, Peeves is the worst. Reminding her of all of the mean nicknames and the ones that she forgot. Why is he like that? It gives this exact energy.
What kind of names were these kids calling you at the pool?
Meathead, Fatso, Lard Butt, Wally the Whale.
Porky, Hog, Fat Ass, Double Wide, Butterball, those sorts of things, right?
After the Death Day party, the trio head up from the dungeons towards a Hogwarts feast that is happening at the same time, and they pass down a corridor where Mrs. Norris is petrified, hung from her tail, and a message is written on the wall in her blood. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. As a side note, I watched the first 2 or 3 movies in this series as a kid, and this scene is the exact moment when I realized that Mrs. Norris is not in fact Professor McGonagall in cat form. Don't ask me how the name difference didn't clue me in, but I was convinced that Professor McGonagall was here in cat form, dead. And then she shows up a scene later, and I was so confused. Now, the fact that our trio happened upon Mrs. Norris first is terrible luck, because just then the feast ends and everyone rushes down the corridor and stumbles upon them there at this site, and Mr. Filch, of course, blames them. When all of the students first see it, Malfoy comes in swinging by reading the inscription and adding, completely out of the blue, "You'll be next, mudbloods." Which, if I heard someone say that in a moment like that, I would probably be more sus of them than anyone else who may or may not be around at the moment. But, I wasn't there, so, everyone is a little bit freaked out by this whole thing, but most of the students are more curious than anything about what the Chamber of Secrets is, and it's pretty much business as usual after this. So after class, the trio decide to go back to where they found Mrs. Norris, because it can't hurt to have a poke around, said Harry. Yes, it can hurt, Harry! You already had major suspicion placed on you for being the ones who found the cat and being seen lurking around her. People are starting to talk about one of you being the heir of Slytherin. It absolutely can hurt to be found wandering around there, Harry. I would stay as far away as I could. But they go anyway. They find some scorch marks, but not much else, and then they decide to go in the bathroom nearby, which happens to be Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. And while in there, I read one of the darkest scenes I've read in fiction in a long time. I wasn't paying attention, said Myrtle dramatically. Peeves upset me so much I came in here and tried to kill myself. Then of course I remembered that I'm already dead, said Ron helpfully. Myrtle gave a tragic sob, rose up in the air, turned over, and dived headfirst into the toilet. Dude, that's so dark. Myrtle tried to off herself and then remembered she was already dead? We just brush over that. But anyway, at this point, Ron, Harry, and Hermione are deep into trying to figure out what's going on, and they're convinced that the heir of Slytherin is Malfoy. Partly for what he said when he read the inscription, and also partly because, he's Malfoy. They decide that they need to take a polyjuice potion to be able to sneak in and talk to Malfoy and get a confession from him unawares. Hermione points out that getting a hold of the recipe will be very difficult. Snape said it was in a book called Most Potent Potions, and it's bound to be in the restricted section of the library. There was only one way to get a book out from the restricted section. You needed a signed note of permission from a teacher. Hard to see why we'd want that book, really, said Ron, if we weren't going to try and make use of one of the potions. I think, said Hermione, that if we made it sound as though we were just interested in the theory, we might stand a chance. Oh, come on. No teacher's going to fall for that, said Ron. They'd have to be really thick. And who do they end up going to? It's Lockhart!
Who's that Pokemon?
It's Pikachu!
Such a great choice. And I'm really proud of Hermione in this scene because she's really growing up. First, she starts to see past her starry-eyed perspective of Lockhart, and this is breaking the rules. And this is character growth because she's starting to see how there are more important things than arbitrary rules, such as protecting innocent people who are being harmed. I bumped my camera again. Oops. The trio make a polyjuice potion, and Harry and Ron turn into Crabbe and Goyle to go and talk to Malfoy. And in talking to him, they find out that not only is he not the heir of Slytherin, but he doesn't know who it is. Then, after this, there's a Quidditch game between Gryffindor and Slytherin, and the second the game starts, the bludger just goes straight after Harry and no one else, and that is not how they're supposed to act. I gotta say, it should be very obvious that someone tampered with the bludger, especially since it's never done anything like that before, and I would think that they would stop the game under those conditions. Luckily, he does manage to avoid the bludger long enough to catch the snitch right over Malfoy's ear. So Harry did manage to catch the snitch, but immediately after gets hit straight on by the bludger and falls and breaks his arm. And who comes to his rescue but Lockhart himself? When Lockhart shows up, we all collectively groan with Harry. Oh no, not you. Lockhart, in attempting to fix him, manages to remove all the bones from Harry's arm. So Harry has to go to the hospital ward and regrow his bones. In the hospital ward, Dobby finally makes a reappearance and admits to sealing platform 9 3/4 when Harry and Ron needed to get through. Not only that, but he also cursed the bludger. What do you mean, your bludger? You made that bludger try and kill me? Not kill you, sir. Never kill you, said Dobby, shocked. Dobby wants to save Harry Potter's life. Better sent home grievously injured than remain here, sir. Dobby only wanted Harry Potter hurt enough to be sent home. What? Dobby literally wants Harry Potter sent home grievously injured. Great way to save someone's life, Dobby. Good job. Around this time, another attack happens. Colin is found petrified with his camera facing forward. The teachers hope to find a picture of what has been doing this, but the film has been completely destroyed. Now, during these few attacks, something really interesting has started to happen. We've been getting little lines here and there about how Ginny specifically is very distraught about these attacks. For example, after Mrs. Norris's attack on page 160, we read this. Ginny seemed very disturbed by Mrs. Norris's fate. According to Ron, she was a great cat lover. Now, after Colin gets attacked, we read this on page 201. Ginny Weasley, who sat next to Colin Creevey in Charms, was distraught. Now, as a first-time reader, assuming that I didn't have the whole plot spoiled for me by the movies, I would easily brush these off. She sat next to Colin in class. He's her friend. She really likes cats. It's easy to see how someone who loves animals would be really freaked out by what happened to Mrs. Norris. Honestly, I feel like most people would be scarred seeing that scene. But like I said, I do know what's going on here, so it's so cool to find these tiny hints about how Ginny is starting to get really freaked out by what she's doing. Mostly unconsciously at this point, I think. But it's subtle enough to not distract or ruin the surprise for people who don't know the secrets. Okay, but Harry is still in the hospital ward when the teachers bring Hogwarts in, so he overhears this. What does this mean, Albus? Professor Gonagall asked urgently. It means, said Dumbledore, that the Chamber of Secrets is indeed open again. But Albus, surely, who? The question is not who, said Dumbledore, his eyes on Colin. The question is how. Wait, the teachers all know? And this happened before, like only 50 years ago. That isn't really that long ago. So how did they cover this up and make it seem like a myth? Anyway, after these recent attacks, the faculty have decided to help the students feel a little bit more safe by teaching them how to duel and thus get more comfortable with offensive and defensive spells. And Lockhart, of course, being the defense against the dark arts teacher, leads the dueling class. For the first day, he invites Snape to come with him and do a little bit of demonstration, and I really, really liked what happened here, so we're gonna do a little bit more reading. Let me introduce my assistant, Professor Snape, said Lockhart, flashing a wide smile. He tells me he knows a teeny little bit about dueling himself, and has sportingly agreed to help me with a short demonstration before we begin. Now, I don't want any of you youngsters to worry. You'll still have your potions master when I'm through with him, never fear. Wouldn't it be good if they finished each other off? Ron muttered in Harry's ear. Oh man, I love how their very different hatred of the two professors is equal in degrees and comes together in this moment. Then they duel, and Professor Snape very quickly disarms Lockhart. Well, there you have it, he said, tottering back onto the platform. That was a disarming charm. As you see, I've lost my wand. Yes, excellent idea to show them that, Professor Snape, but if you don't mind me saying so, it was very obvious what you were about to do. If I had wanted to stop you, it would have been only too easy. However, I felt it would be instructive to let them see. Oh man, how does Lockhart not drive every living being crazy? The way that he insists on saving face and pretending to be better than everyone else. Ooh, Snape was looking murderous. Possibly Lockhart had noticed because he said, enough demonstrating. I'm going to come amongst you now and put you all into pairs. Professor Snape, if you'd like to help me. Harry, of course, gets paired with Malfoy because Snape hates him. In their duel, despite being told to practice disarming, Harry and Malfoy send backward and forth tickling and dancing spells, respectively. What? They don't even do anything particularly harmful, but when it comes to fighting each other, they absolutely will not listen to rules. Malfoy casts a spell that sends a snake charging at Harry. Somehow Harry avoids it and it starts heading for a guy named Justin. Harry wasn't sure what made him do it. He wasn't even aware of deciding to do it. All he knew was that his legs were carrying him forward as though he was on casters, and he had shouted stupidly at the snake, "Leave him!" And miraculously, inexplicably, the snake slumped to the floor, docile as a thick black garden hose. its eyes now on Harry. My first thought of this scene, for some reason, was just that I was really glad to see that this thread got picked up again. We had this moment with the snake in the first book, and I really love to see things that seem like a little moment actually matter later. So we get to see Harry talking to snakes again, but the timing is the worst possible, because being a parcel tongue and being able to talk to snakes is apparently crazy uncommon. Like, it makes everyone absolutely certain that he is the heir to Slytherin, which is very unfortunate for Harry. Quick note, when I first heard how rare being a parcel tongue is, I was like, that seems a little odd that Harry Potter would happen to have such a very rare skill. But luckily, later on in this book, Dumbledore explains that when Harry defeated Voldemort as a baby, some of Voldemort's powers transferred into Harry, and you know I love being given reasonable explanations for things that would otherwise be far too convenient. So now Harry looks super sus to everyone, right? Because the OG Slytherin guy and Voldy are parcel tongues, and pretty much no one besides them that I've been told of. So everyone thinks that Harry is the heir and doing the attacks. So this guy confronts Harry, saying that he's the heir and that Justin, a mudblood and the guy who almost just got attacked by the snake, is definitely going to be targeted next. So he told Justin to stay away from Harry. Harry tries to explain that it isn't him, but no one believes him. And then, in the worst turn of events, Justin is literally the next person to be petrified. So now everyone thinks that Harry is the heir. Nearly Headless Nick was also at the scene of Justin's attack. In fact, we find out later that Justin probably saw the basilisk through Nick, and that's why he got petrified and not... Around this time, the trio have been consistently meeting up at Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, like when they made the polyjuice potion. And one of the times when they're there, Harry finds the diary. Harry's messing with this diary, trying to figure out why such an old and empty diary is there, and he starts to write in it, and it writes back. He starts talking back and forth with the journal, who says it's a memory of Tom Riddle, who was a student who was there 50 years ago, the last time the Chamber of Secrets was opened. And all throughout this time talking to Tom, Harry says that talking to Tom felt like talking to an old friend he'd once known. This is both cool and weird, and also very creepy, as we know that Harry has a little bit of Voldemort's soul in him that's probably recognizing Tom. Harry starts taking the journal with him a couple of places, and oh man, Ginny freaks out when she sees Harry with the journal. Also, through his conversations with Tom, he's started to learn a lot of things, including a memory that he's shown that implicates Hagrid as the heir of Slytherin, as Tom in the memory confronts Hagrid for hiding a beast that is a giant spider. So you and I know that while this scene did happen, Hagrid isn't the heir and the spider isn't the monster from the chamber. But Harry doesn't know that. And later, we also learn that here, Tom is framing Hagrid. And we learn that Tom specifically framed Hagrid because the attacks from the chamber were getting so bad that they were going to close the school and send everybody home. And Tom wanted to stay at Hogwarts and not go back to the orphanage for the summer. So he needed to find someone to take the fall so that he could say the danger was over. Tom chose to frame Hagrid just so he could stay at Hogwarts over the summer? Otherwise, he would have kept attacking people. Like, that is a crazy level of selfishness. Voldemort really is just this insanely remorseless killer guy. This detail about him killing with the basilisk and then stopping when it becomes inconvenient for him is so chilling. Also, this whole section with Harry communicating with Tom is really scary and eerie as a reader who knows the secrets, but I bet it would be really exciting and like we're solving a mystery for readers who don't know the secrets. All throughout this time, Harry has been hearing the basilisk as it goes through the walls. Now, Harry hears this voice once again sometime after this, and this time it says it is definitely going to kill. But never fear, Harry's only comfort was that everyone was now outside to watch the Quidditch game. I'm sorry, is attending Quidditch mandatory? Now, obviously I don't think that attending Quidditch games is actually mandatory, but I just think it's a bold assumption that everyone would go. That certainly wasn't how it was at my high school in America, the land of football. There was no guarantee that a specific portion of the student body would attend even home games. This is either a weird aspect of Hogwarts that wasn't explained, or it is evidence that a 12-year-old assumes that everyone else is as obsessed with his hobby as he is. Probably the latter. So Harry plays Quidditch, or plans to, before McGonagall rushes in and tells everyone that there's been another attack. And this time, it's Hermione. She hadn't attended the game because she was researching the monster in the library and was found petrified with a mirror in her hand. Now, unfortunately, this means that Hermione is out of commission for the rest of the book, but luckily it does mean a few good things. First, it ups the stakes and throws us into the meat of the action. Second, it tells them that reflections are important and that no living creature that has been petrified looked the monster in the eyes. And third, not yet but soon, Harry and Ron will find a clue in Hermione's hand. Oh, and fourth, Everyone stops assuming that Harry is the heir because they know he would never attack Hermione, one of his closest friends. So that's nice. After this, the entire school is placed under lockdown, but Harry and Ron slip out to go talk to Hagrid to talk to him about what Harry learned from the journal. They get to Hagrid's hut and start talking to him, but before they get the chance to ask him anything about the memory that Harry saw, a bunch of people start bursting into the hut. And Harry and Ron hide under the invisibility cloak while Hagrid deals with them. First, Dumbledore and Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic. Fudge is here to take Hagrid away because he's on record as being the chamber opener before and has been expelled for it in the past. So when the new attacks start happening again and him physically being in that proximity, they feel the need to take him away again. Dumbledore is there, certainly because he's Hagrid's boss and the headmaster, but also because he wants to make it known to Hagrid and Fudge that he doesn't think Hagrid did it, and that once Hagrid is locked away, the attacks will continue and Hagrid will be acquitted. Then, there's another knock on the door and Lucius Malfoy marches in with an order to remove Dumbledore as a result of the attacks. Now, we find out later that Lucius Malfoy had used some sort of coercion on the different people to sign that order, but given that he is the one who gave Ginny the diary to begin with, I assume this was a part of his end goal to begin with. And as Dumbledore is being led away, he says this: "However, you will find that help will always be given at Hogwarts to those who ask for it." For a second, Harry was almost sure Dumbledore's eyes flickered toward the corner where he and Ron stood hidden. So clearly he can see them inside the invisibility cloak. Now, I'm not too fixated on this because the most powerful wizard or whatever. But then, hilariously, Hagrid takes the hint from Dumbledore and says, "If anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do is to follow the spiders. That'd lead 'em right. That's all I'm saying. And someone will need to feed Fang while I'm away." I just really love how many conversations are happening to a seemingly empty hut. Anyway, Harry and Ron go off into the forest following the spiders, almost get eaten, get saved by the car. Yes, that's right, the flying car. The one that they flew to Hogwarts in and then ran away after getting busted by the Whomping Willow. Yeah, that one shows back up out of the blue and saves them. I can truthfully say I did not expect the car to show back up at all. But, you know, we did know that it wandered off into the Forbidden Forest, so it is there. So, yeah. The main takeaway from that whole thing is that the spider isn't the monster from the chamber, and therefore Hagrid wasn't the heir. He wasn't the one doing this, and so the diary is wrong. Right after this, we have this moment where Ginny comes up to Ron and Harry and almost tells them something important. Wink, wink. But then Percy interrupts them and she runs off. I'm pretty sure Percy is actually one of the villains of this book. Okay, so Hermione's petrified, the entire school is on lockdown, you're not allowed to go anywhere unless you're being escorted, right? Okay, but now Ron and Harry want to get to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom because something the spiders said made them think that Moaning Myrtle might be the person who was killed 50 years ago when this happened last. So they're wandering to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom and Professor McGonagall catches them. "Potter, Weasley, what are you doing?" It was Professor McGonagall, and her mouth was the thinnest of thin lines. We were, Ron stammered. "We were going to go see Hermione," said Ron. Ron and Professor McGonagall both looked at him. "We haven't seen her for ages, Professor," Harry went on hurriedly, treading on Ron's foot, "and we thought we'd sneak into the hospital wing, you know, to tell her the mandrakes were nearly ready and, not to worry." Professor McGonagall was still staring at him, and for a moment, Harry thought she was going to explode. But then she spoke, and it was in a strangely croaky voice. "Of course, I realize this has all been hardest on the friends of those who have been... I quite understand. Yes, Potter, of course you may visit Miss Granger. I will inform Professor Binns where you're gone. Tell Madame Pomfrey I've given my permission." Ron and Harry walked away, hardly daring to believe that they'd avoided detention. As they turned the corner, they distinctly heard Professor McGonagall blow her nose. This scene almost made me cry out of love for McGonagall. She's the bestest to ever exist, and definitely the best teacher at Hogwarts. She's strict, but so lovely. Though, obviously they weren't actually going to visit Hermione, but now they have to. And so, of course, they're super awkward sitting there talking to petrified Hermione. But while being awkward and sitting there, they discover a note in Hermione's hand. The note gave them enough information to figure out it was a basilisk, and it was traveling through the pipes. I am a little disappointed that the book doesn't show Hermione working out the clues or solving the mystery. It feels a little lazy to have that happen off screen, but at least at this point they do walk through how each person was petrified, which I appreciated. For example, Hermione knew the trick and was looking around corners with a mirror. I gotta say though, thinking about this, it is unfortunate that the mirror trick doesn't totally work to protect you like it traditionally would against Gorgons. It's nice that there's a way to avoid dying, but you still get petrified, so that kinda sucks. Also, hold on. After getting this information while they're researching basilisks, they just totally brush over something kind of important in my opinion. They discover how basilisks are made, and apparently you just hatch a chicken's egg under a toad? What? You mean the most common form of an egg in Western society, and an animal infamous for being caught by children? That's way too easy. You expect me to believe that half of the 11-year-olds aren't trying this every spring? After the discovery about the basilisk, Ron and Harry rush to the teacher's lounge to tell Professor McGonagall. But just as they do, they hear Professor McGonagall tell all the students to go back to their dorms and all the teachers to meet in the teacher's lounge, and rightfully assume that there's been another attack. Now they, being Harry and Ron, obviously choose to hide in a cupboard and overhear what's going on, rather than go back to their dorms. It has happened, she told the silent staff room. A student has been taken by the monster, right into the chamber itself. The heir of Slytherin, said Professor McGonagall, who was very white, left another message, right under the first one. Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. McGonagall also reveals that the student is Ginny Weasley. After this, the professors start talking about how they're probably going to have to close Hogwarts and send everybody home. And then Professor Lockhart waltzes in late, and this section was so satisfying, I just have to read it. So sorry, dozed off. What have I missed? He didn't seem to notice that the other teachers were looking at him with something remarkably like hatred. Snape stepped forward. Just the man, he said, the very man. A girl has been snatched by the monster, Lockhart, taken into the Chamber of Secrets itself. Your moment has come at last. Lockhart blanched. That's right, Gilderoy, chipped in Professor Sprout. Weren't you just saying last night that you've known all along where the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is? I spluttered Lockhart. Yes, didn't you tell me that you were sure you knew what was inside it? Piped up Professor Flitwick. Did I? I don't recall. I certainly remember you saying that you were sorry you hadn't had a crack at the monster before Hagrid was arrested, said Snape. Didn't you say that the whole affair had been bungled and that you should have been given free rein from the first? Lockhart stared around the room at his stony-faced colleagues. I really never. You must have misunderstood. We'll leave it to you then, Gilderoy, said Professor McGonagall. Tonight will be an excellent time to do it. We'll make sure everyone's out of your way. You'll be able to tackle the monster all by yourself. A free rein at last. Lockhart gazed desperately around him, but nobody came to the rescue. He didn't look remotely handsome anymore. His lip was trembling, and in the absence of his usually toothy grin, he looked weak-chinned and weedy. Very well, he said. I'll be in my office, getting ready. And he left the room. Right, said Professor McGonagall, whose nostrils were flared. That's got him out from under our feet. The way all the professors turned on Lockhart was absolutely priceless. This was so satisfying to see. The professors all totally saw through Lockhart and chef's kiss.
Oh, beautiful.
Surprisingly now, when they hear that Ginny has been taken, Harry and Ron don't just immediately rush to go rescue her, which, I'm not gonna lie, is kind of what I expected based on the bravado of the last book where they raced Snape to the stone. Instead, they approach Lockhart with what they know to help him, and it turns out to be a huge mistake. The boys find Lockhart madly packing rather than preparing to save Ginny, and this conversation happens. Well, I must say, when I took the job, Lockhart muttered, nothing in the job description. Didn't expect. You mean you're running away? Said Harry disbelievingly. After all that stuff you did in your books? Books can be misleading, said Lockhart delicately. You wrote them, Harry shouted. Harry's got a point. Lockhart then goes on a villain's rant about how he didn't actually do any of the things in his books, but rather wiped the memories of the wizards and witches who did. He then turns to wipe Harry and Ron's memories, since he just revealed his secrets, but luckily, Harry took a dueling class this semester. From Lockhart. Belliarmus's that wand away, and Ron catches it and throws it out the window. Now, being the ones with power, and or wands, Harry and Ron force Lockhart to go with them to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. They find her, ask her how she died. She doesn't know much, but she remembers seeing glowing yellow eyes near the sinks, so they go and investigate. They find a carving of a snake on one of them, and Harry says open in parcel tongue, and sure enough, it opens up, revealing a large pipe that leads downward. Now, I just gotta jet in here and say it is terribly unlucky for Voldemort that Harry is here, because basically no one else would have been able to get down there and stop him without the power of being a parcel tongue, or maybe a jackhammer. Now, being reasonably certain that the pipe leads to the Chamber of Secrets, and also being reasonably scared, they force Lockhart to go first, which I love for them. He slides down the pipe and doesn't die, so Harry and Ron follow him into the chamber. Soon after entering the chamber, they come across a massive snake skin, and Lockhart almost faints. He either almost faints, that is, or he's faking it. I'm not sure which, because right after this, when they're distracted, he grabs Ron's wand and tries to obliviate them, or wipe their minds. And the poor taped up wand misfires and causes an explosion and a minor cave-in, leaving Harry trapped on one side on the inside of the chamber and Ron and Lockhart on the other. Luckily, the wand didn't just misfire, it also backfired and obliviated Lockhart himself. amazing. This is poetic justice if I've ever seen it. But alas, Ron and Harry are separated for the end. It seems to me that Harry always ends up having to do the last leg of the journey on his own. Now, that might not always be the case. I'm just noticing this off of 2 data points. But, you know, I'd be fine with him winning a battle with a friend or 2 sometime. Harry gets into the chamber and rushes to Ginny's side, laying on the chamber floor white as stone, and he can't rouse her. Then, Tom Riddle, the Force Ghost, the memory, enters, saying she's alive, but Harry won't be able to wake her. This scene is excruciating. Harry still very much thinks that Tom is his friend. Harry tells him that there's a basilisk that might be back any moment and they need to get Ginny out of the Chamber of Secrets, but Tom makes no move to help. Harry looks over and sees that Tom has picked up the wand that he's cast aside and says thanks, assuming that Tom has picked it up to hand it back to Harry. He still really trusts Tom, and realization is starting to slowly dawn on him, but denial is fighting back hard. Harry is starting to get confused and scared, and then Tom says this. "I've waited a long time for this, Harry Potter," said Riddle, "for the chance to see you, to speak to you." "Look," said Harry, losing patience, "I don't think you get it. We're in the Chamber of Secrets. We can talk later." "We're going to talk now," said Riddle, still smiling broadly as he pocketed Harry's wand. This betrayal is so harsh. It's slow and painful, and you feel so bad for Harry. It's written well enough, as well, that even though I knew the plot, it was still excruciating to experience. Tom then explains how Ginny had started to confide in him, writing in the journal very much the same way that Harry had, and because of this connection that she was starting to form with him, it allowed Tom to do things through her, like write the message on the wall. Then as she started to slowly realize what she was doing, he made her feel more and more crazy, and the whole thing is so sinister. It's also super intense because it's really easy to draw the connection between this circumstance and internet grooming. I think Rowling created a super interesting metaphor for it by showing the dangers of who you trust, especially when you know so little about them except for what they have told you. Tom then goes on to explain that through this relationship, he started to slowly drain away her life toward himself. Slowly at first, but more quickly now, which is why she's unconscious and he's able to leave the journal. Again, there are more clear metaphors here about how actual groomers can drain the life out of the children that they target. Tom finally reveals to Harry that he is Voldemort, and Harry is crushed. Luckily, around then, Fawkes, Dumbledore's Phoenix, shows up and drops the sorting hat in Harry's lap. Neither Harry nor Tom really know what to make of that, and so they continue their conversation, which currently is Tom asking Harry how he managed to defeat Voldemort in the future. Harry explains that his mom died protecting him, and Voldemort reveals that dying to protect someone is a powerful countercharm. Now, I'm not mad about how this is revealed at all, not even waiting till the second book to get this information. Some mysteries need to be solved slower and piece by piece. I thought this was a great reveal. Then, Tom summons the basilisk, and Harry takes off running with his eyes closed. And Fawkes comes in to save the day and gouges out the basilisk's eyes. Thank goodness. Now Harry can fight it with his eyes open, which is, you know, a little easier to do. And the basilisk charges at Harry, and not knowing what else to do, he puts the sorting hat on and says to himself, "Please, please help me, please, please help me." And a sword falls out of the hat directly onto Harry's head and nearly knocks him out. Very helpful. Yes, thank you. Fat lot of good it would have done him unconscious, but, why is that how it was delivered? Like, obviously Harry's going to put the hat on his head. It's a hat. Also, last time he put it on his head, the last 2 times, in fact, it spoke to him. So, I don't know. That seemed like a reasonable choice to me. But also, how else is a hat going to deliver an item? I guess ultimately this is just the situation we're left with, and I guess we can be grateful it didn't knock Harry out completely. Now Harry has a sword in hand, and the basilisk charges at him, and he manages to lunge and stab it as it tries to bite him. Now Harry has a sword, and the basilisk charges at Harry, and Harry manages to lunge forward and stab the snake, but not before one of its fangs gouges into his arm. Harry watches the basilisk die and then feels his consciousness waning and realizes that he's dying too. I really liked this whole scene as Harry thanks Fawkes for helping him out, and Fawkes cuddles up to Harry and cries a single tear onto his wound. Tom, unfortunately, realizes that Phoenix's tears have healing powers and shoots at it with the wand like it's a pew-pew. That part made me laugh. Not sure they work that way, but I'm not the author. Anyway, Harry is starting to be able to think again, and Fawkes flies away and comes back and drops the journal in Harry's lap. For a split second, both Harry and Riddle, wand still raised, stared at it. Then, without thinking, without considering, as though he had meant to do it all along, Harry seized the basilisk fang on the floor next to him and plunged it straight into the heart of the book. There was a long, dreadful, piercing string. Ink spurted out of the diary in torrents, streaming over Harry's hand, flooding the floor. Riddle was writhing and twisting, screaming and flailing, and then he was gone. Yes! Amazing. Amazing. I mean, in that circumstance, if the diary had dropped into my lap and I had something vaguely nearby that I could stab it with, I definitely would have tried to stab it too. I think that's a super logical move. We're lucky it worked. Then Ginny starts to wake up and Harry helps her back to the cave-in where Ron has made a Harry-sized hole, and Harry and Ginny squeeze through and they all make it out to safety. But not before another hilarious line where Lockhart, with no memory of anything, says this. "Hello," he said. "Odd sort of place this, isn't it? Do you live here?" This version of Lockhart is so funny. Vast improvement, if you ask me. Harry and Ron bring Ginny right to McGonagall's office, where the Weasley parents are, having come the moment they heard that Ginny had been captured. As Harry explains everything, Dumbledore, who's there for reasons that I forgot despite being fired recently, cuts in saying he wonders how Ginny had been bewitched by the diary. By stating it that matter-of-factly, he quickly removes any blame that would have been placed on Ginny, which is astute because she was, in fact, bewitched. Because of this, Ginny doesn't get punished, luckily, and Ron and Harry get points towards Gryffindor house, which I think in this situation is very deserved. Now, happily, the threat is over, and I have a few more points to talk about as the book is wrapping up. First, in their explaining of what happened to Dumbledore, Ron and Harry explain that Lockhart tried to do a memory charm on them and it backfired and got him instead, and Dumbledore says, "Impaled on your own sword, Gilderoy." And I'm sorry, what? Dumbledore knew that he was a fraud? That he'd been wiping other witches' and wizards' memories? And he hired him? Or at least didn't prevent his hire? Comments on my last video about Dumbledore placing students in dangerous situations said that Dumbledore was trying to test Harry, and that's why he let Harry, an 11-year-old child, face off against the Dark Lord. I'm not super comfortable with that explanation personally, but if you try and use that excuse here, then I'm sorry, you straight up call Dumbledore a bad person. 'Cause, like, he let Lockhart teach them despite knowing that he would be terrible at it, and he knew what a horrible person Lockhart was and didn't try to, like, stop him or lock him up. For what? To test Harry and give him a chance to beat a powerful wizard? I'm sorry, I will not accept comments of that nature. No, because any adult who knowingly puts children in the hands of dangerous people is a bad person in my book. Maybe you could argue that Dumbledore knew what Lockhart was doing, and instead of confronting or stopping him, he decided to protect people by taking him off the streets. But making him a teacher and putting him in charge of vulnerable people isn't really the answer. I'm really struggling to justify this one, and I would just rather pretend that Dumbledore did in fact not know what Lockhart had been doing all along. Like I said, this is when Dumbledore explains that Voldemort gave Harry some of his powers when Harry defeated him, and that's why Harry can speak Parseltongue, and that explanation went really well for me. Oh, and Dumbledore also at the same time mentions that only a true Gryffindor can pull the sword from the sorting hat, which I think is an interesting concept, but it makes the houses that you're sorted into feel like really deep. Like maybe your star sign or your race or some part of your nature. I'm not sure because it seemed kind of arbitrary where Harry was placed in houses. I feel like I might have liked this scene better if Dumbledore had said only someone showing true courage could pull the sword out of the hat or something like that. Oh, and then Harry insists on giving the diary back to Lucius Malfoy, and along with it gives him a dirty sock, which he casts aside right into Dobby, and that sets Dobby free. I absolutely love Harry for doing that. Lucius, on the other hand, does not and starts threatening Harry, and Dobby just like blasts him across the room. I laughed pretty hard at that because finally Dobby saved Harry's life by hurting someone else instead of Harry. Yay! Also, upon realizing that Dobby could attack him, Lucius Malfoy hightails and runs, which I think is really interesting because that makes me think maybe these house elves are like super powerful, because what would make a powerful wizard like Malfoy run the other way? So, food for thought. Right after this, they announce that the cure for petrification, the mandrakes, are ready, and all of the petrified people start to come back to life. Hermione runs up to Harry and Ron and says, "You solved it!" which made me laugh because she did most of the solving, but you know, they did do some of the solving and definitely most of the fighting. Mostly I'm just glad to have Hermione back. Everything is settling back into its natural order. Ginny is smiling again, which I was super happy about, and we find out that Percy has been sus because of his secret girlfriend, and Lockhart is apparently being sent off to regain his memories. I'm sorry? He should not be sent off to find his memories again. He should be in jail. And we get one last joke about the Dursleys at the end. Grant and Uncle will be proud though, won't they, said Hermione, when they hear what you did this year? Proud? Said Harry. Are you mad? All those times I could have died and I didn't manage it? They'll be furious. And as bleak as that sounds, it made me laugh. My concluding thoughts are I loved this book. More than the first one, I think. J.K. Rowling really hit her stride with this book. Every moment was funny or thrilling or interesting. And while it's still clearly written to a younger audience at this point, it was very engaging, and I actually didn't find as much influence from Roald Dahl and other authors. I really feel like J.K. Rowling's own voice was starting to come through a lot better in this book. This book also starts to take on darker themes and heavier stakes as students start to get picked off one by one. The parallel for racism with the pureblood concept, another parallel for internet grooming, and with Ginny being nearly killed. You can really start to feel Harry Potter take on the spooky paranormal vibes that later define the Harry Potter series. As made clear through the green tinting of a lot of the movies, just like Twilight uses a blue tinting to emphasize the paranormal spooky feeling. Like I said, I think I like this book more than book one, but I can't really place my finger on why. It was a little bit longer, which is probably part of it, but I also feel that the major intrigue and mystery is carried through a lot earlier in this book. Most of the first book was world building and whimsy, and we really only get to the race to the stone in the last few chapters. In this book, on the other hand, the mystery and intrigue and plot start a lot sooner, with the majority of the book being trying to solve the mystery and figure out what is going on, which I really enjoyed. This is also the book that I know the most about since I've seen its corresponding movie the most times, so I do feel like there might be a little bit of a bias at play here. But either way, it's safe to say I love this book and I'm thoroughly enjoying reading this series, and I'm going to continue for sure. I still have my issues with Quidditch and points and Dumbledore putting people in danger, but everything that frustrated me was basically side details and didn't affect the plot too much. I would love for the world building to be perfect and make all the sense, but I'm much more comfortable with things not making sense on that front rather than on the plot development or character side of things, so I'll let it slide. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please give it a like if you liked it. If you got all the way through this video without going back to watch my review of book one, well, it's not too late. Also, if you like this video, you might want to check out my Wheel of Time series, where I react to reading Wheel of Time for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to follow my Goodreads, Instagram, etc., all of which are Emily at Midnight and are linked below. Have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book.